So, our funny story. A couple of weeks ago, Greg and I went to Brisbane.
Okay.
And if any of you out there have ever visited Brisbane before, you'll
Hmm.
know beautiful, beautiful city, right? And
Okay.
the
Yep.
river is gorgeous. But you'll also realize that the river has the capacity to completely disorientate you as far as direction wise, because it's a
Hmm.
very windy river. And
Yeah.
so we were making our way from where we were staying. We were staying in a little Airbnb towards a new pedestrian bridge that we were looking forward to exploring, and we'd not been there before. And
Hmm.
but we were at a point in along the river where there was river on both sides of us. You know, we were on Kangaroo
Mm.
Point, and um, as we were walking, we were trying to figure out how to get to this pedestrian bridge. And in my mind, the bridge was like behind me, and in Greg's
Okay.
mind, the bridge was in front of us, and
Okay.
the river's now on either side of us. And we're walking, and he's trying to explain where he thinks, how he thinks we can get to
Mm.
the start of this bridge, and I'm sort of explaining another way, and we were getting quite worked up, and he was sort of, I'm right and you're wrong, and I'm like, but I'm right and you're wrong.
You're wrong.
And suddenly he stopped walking and he said, Catherine, I think we should stop talking. Neither of us have had coffee yet. And that got us laughing because we had just been
Yeah.
reading, one of the tips to being married 30 years is don't
Yeah.
ever, ever t start talking until you've had coffee.
Okay.
So
Okay.
anyway, I was sort of in a bit of a huff. And so anyway, I mean, laughing, but still in a huff, and thought, you know what, I know this about myself, that my sense of direction's not good. So I thought, Kath, just zip it and just follow Greg. So as we're
Mm.
walking, we get to a point and I couldn't help myself. I just blurted out, I told you so, so you see, this
Yeah.
is what I was explaining. And he looked at me and he goes, no, but I told you so. And then the penny dropped, and we realized that we had both been right and we had both been explaining, correctly where
Okay.
we wanted to get to, but we were speaking from completely opposite perspectives. It was
Right.
almost like that little meme of the guy standing, and he sees a six, and the other guy standing sees a nine, because we're looking at the same thing
Right.
from opposite perspectives.
So you're both right.
We were both right, and we started laughing because we were both like, and then, we explained ourselves a bit better and realized that we
Mm.
were just explaining the exact same thing, but from opposite ends
Mm.
of, the
Mm.
perspective. And
Yeah.
so the assumption was that we weren't being very generous in our assumptions, and that's what we want to talk
No.
about today. Because in his book, as part of the connection belonging piece, it is the power of generous assumptions.
Generous assumptions. I love that because I don't know how many times something similar with my kids. We're trying to explain something, but because the way we articulate is a bit different. And I'd be like, yeah, but that's what I've been saying all along. And they're like, no, it's not. You were saying, I'm like, what? And it's so easy to get confused when we're assuming that we're right and they're wrong. And it does, it happens. Like if you sort of think back and think about your day and think about, what goes on, it's easy to not be so generous in our assumption and assume perhaps the worst of a situation or the worst of people or the worst of ourselves or
Oh, and especially in the world we're living in today, where there is so much negativity sort of out there, it's
mm,
so easy to assume when someone opens their mouth and shares something that they're coming from this place of, oh, the world is so
judgment.
crazy and bad, and yeah,
Mm,
assume, yeah, where that not might not be where they're coming from at all.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah, uh, definitely. And so the word generous assumption, I like the word generous. Like I
Yeah.
wonder, let's think about generous assumptions. What can that look like? So sorry, you've
Well,
got
in
a
his
thought I
book,
can chum.
so I'll just like, so in his book, he shares that how powerful they can be for unlocking human connection. In other words, for promoting
Mm,
human connection, and
mm,
also for promoting empathy and compassion. And
mm,
we spoke about this last time about empathy being the antidote to shame.
yeah.
And so one of the ways we can show empathy is by practicing this thing called generous assumptions. And the way to do this is by asking a simple question. And I love questions, in the coaching
Yes, you
space.
do.
It's all
Mm-hmm.
about being curious.
Mm-hmm.
And the question he poses in his book is, what is the most generous assumption that I can make as to why the other person
Hmm.
did this or said that? And I think for me,
Mm.
generous means expansive. It means, but also if I'm being generous, it's a good thing, right?
It's kind.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when people are, if something's been spoken, if, we're noticing so many things. We're noticing the words they use. We're noticing the tone. We're noticing the context that we think that they're saying it within. So when we're being generous, we could consider a lot of things.
Yeah. And I'm also just thinking, assumptions, where do we jump in and in this day and age make such quick assumptions? And
Mm,
that's I'm just like my phone, text messages come through and someone texts
yeah.
something, and how
Mm,
quick and easy is it to assume
mm,
the tone, the
mm.
words. Or sometimes I've written a text to somebody and then I send it and then I reread my own text and I think, oh
You go,
shucks,
oh,
that could have been
mm,
ta that can be taken in so many ways. And
yeah.
I hope the person on the other end is assuming,
Mm,
the place I'm coming from and
yeah.
how easy
That they
it
know
is.
your heart.
Yeah,
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 and it is. I mean, unless we put a smiley face on the end of some of our statements on text, it could easily be assumed that we're being short or that we're
yeah,
just having a dig at something or whatever, when that's often not the case. And even people's tone, like I think we spoke last week a little bit about how important, how easy it is to get caught up in busyness, right? And not be
yeah,
intentional with connection. That's also the same with our tone. I know sometimes of a morning, if we're trying to get out of the house and be on time, my tone, which I'm using as a hurried tone, because let's be
yeah,
quick, could be also considered being short and sharp,
yeah,
and especially like with kids and stuff like that. And so I think we can make assumptions around people's tones. I'm not usually angry. I don't get cranky about stuff all that often. But am I in a hurry? Sometimes, yes. And so it's easy sometimes. Like I noticed one time Jackson sort of commenting, and I'm like, I'm not angry. I'm just trying to be quick. I'm just trying to get out the door, Jax.
yeah,
And we assume over everything. We assume meaning around people's faces, the
yeah.
expression on somebody's face. We assume a meaning if someone walks past and doesn't talk to us.
Yeah, oh,
We,
absolutely. And I think also as you're sharing that, I'm also remembering how it's much easier to have generous thoughts about our assumptions when I'm feeling good about myself. So
Mm.
if I'm feeling like I'm insecure or I'm uncertain or I think, let's just say I think that you don't really like me that much, and then
Mm.
you comment something, then I
Mm.
assume it is like, oh, so you see, that's evidence. There's more
Yeah.
evidence that that person doesn't like me. And I'm making all these assumptions
Yeah.
that are perhaps not that generous.
No, we do it all the time. Even um something I had put on an outfit the other day and wasn't sure. I was like, oh, I don't know if I really like it. And then someone made a comment about, I don't know, the tag or something on it. And I was like, oh, that's it. I can't wear this outfit. Like I was assuming that they didn't like it on me, and that wasn't what they were saying. They just noticed that something just needed fixing on my outfit. It
Yeah.
didn't mean I needed to get changed and I looked terrible in my outfit. We we spend a lot of time making assumptions, and wouldn't it be a beautiful space if we could consider our assumptions and
Well, I
tweak
think,
them?
yeah, and I think just reading, like it's important enough to get a mention in this book, right?
Yes.
Um, that it's another choice point we have.
Yeah.
And I think we make assumptions, as you said, all the time without
Mm.
even being aware of the assumptions we're
Mm-mm.
making. And I think how easy it is to not even be aware that for some of us, we can so easily slip into this habit of our assumptions falling on the pessimistic side of life or the negative side of things or
Mm.
we all know people. I mean, you and I, we've all
Yes.
come across people in our world that whenever we give them a call or we meet them, the languaging that comes out is this glass half empty. you know,
Mm.
and then you share a story and then the languaging
They've
back
got
is
a
this
worse
sort of
story.
yeah, and
Yeah,
it's just, and that kind of thing so often happens when I'm observing that this person has no idea that that's what's happening.
true.
And I think we can go through life being completely unaware
Mm.
that we're being unkind in our assumptions, or
Yeah,
we're not being generous with them.
no.
And so I've loved reading about this because it has had me stopping to consider in my own world and life the kinds of assumptions that I
Mm.
make.
Mm.
And it's interesting that when we start getting curious and asking ourselves about something,
Mm.
we start noticing it everywhere.
Hmm. Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And if it's important, if what's his name? Ben Crow, if he's sort of saying that having generous assumptions is important for connection, and it, like you say, it has a mention in the book, it's something that we can consider and we can become aware of and we can change to hopefully help us connect better with the people who are in our world, in our workplace, within our families, within whoever it is, the general public, as we're walking, being served at Coles when we're doing our shopping, and not making having generous assumptions with the person who's working, and bagging
Yeah.
our shopping for us. It changes the way we connect with ourselves and with our world.
And what I
And I
also
love that.
like about it, yeah, is that it's a quite a straightforward stepping stone to turning the dial up on empathy in our life. Because I've
Yeah.
often found, like I read the word empathy, I've heard people talk about empathy, but if you'd had asked me before, how does one be more empathetic?
Okay.
It for me that's a difficult question to answer. I'm like, oh, you just be
Just
more.
be.
You be kinder, you listen more,
Mm.
you judge less, all those things. But I think this is quite a helpful, clear choice step. Oh, I can
Mm.
choose to give the person a benefit of the doubt. I can choose
Mm.
to if I'm going to make an assumption this way or that way, and assumptions are never the real truth. Like I'm assuming that I understand the truth. And if
Yeah.
I can assume and I can choose to always assume with the benefit
Mm. Mm.
and be kind in my assumption,
Mm.
gosh, not only does that sort of lift things for my own life and mind,
Yes.
but it's
Yeah.
just so, it does so for the other person as well. And I think it comes back to what we were sharing last time about connection starts with connection to self. And I
Mm.
think if we can be generous with our assumptions, it's it's almost like if we view life through this kaleidoscope, the kaleidoscope. And
Mm.
if we
Mm.
can if you just tilt the kaleidoscope a little bit,
A little bit.
then all the colors like fall in a different space. So if we can
Mm.
just shift our perspective towards
Mm.
being more generous with our assumptions,
Mm.
how we view everything can look completely
Yes.
different
Yes.
in a much kinder, better way.
Agreed. And that makes me think about living a life that's, where we're really grateful, where we're looking with a heart of gratitude towards everything. It doesn't change necessarily the reality of some things, but it changes the way we view it and the way that we feel. It changes the state that we are showing up in the world with. And when
Yeah.
we've got a state where we are having generous assumptions, where we have a heart that's grateful and we're seeing all of the good things, gives us that beautiful, a different filter to see our world. It
Yeah.
gives us different connection in our brain. It actually helps with our brain to make better choices and to problem solve and to think creatively, all of those things simply by being a little bit more generous with the way we view the world.
Yeah, yeah. And look, it's not always easy. And I think
Oh, it's definitely
it
not.
can, yeah, and it can be, and I'm just thinking about the circumstance where you've got someone in your world, or, I might have someone in my world, and this person, for whatever reason, is hard work.
Yeah.
We've all got hard work
We've
people
got,
in our world.
yeah.
And and then we've also got people in our world who are not hard work. So now I've got these two people in my mind's
Mm.
eye, and each one of them can say the same thing,
Mm.
but my assumption towards the one that I find really difficult and the assumption towards the one that I find easier. Like I can be unbeknown to my, not even aware that I'm making two completely different assumptions based on my
Who's saying
pre,
it?
yeah,
Yeah.
and my pre-wired feelings about how I feel about these people.
Person. Yeah.
And so, and I think, what could it be like? And I'm not saying this is easy, but the
No.
person that I find is hard work. If I shift and I start choosing to go, you know what, next time I see that person, I'm going to try and practice a generous assumption.
Mm.
Just
Mm.
wondering how that
What would
perhaps
shift?
shifts. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah, that's interesting because my initial response when you sort of say, we've got, when you commented that we've all got people in our lives that are a little bit more difficult, a bit
yeah.
tiresome or whatever it is. My initial thought is, okay, well, I'll just spend less time with them. Easy, sorted.
Yeah, yeah,
But I like
yeah.
yours a little bit better, and that's putting into practice
Well,
what we're reading about, right?
sometimes, well, and this is again where wisdom comes in. Sometimes maybe space from that person is the kindest thing you can do,
Yeah.
but sometimes that's not always an option.
No.
Sometimes it depends on the relationship and how much that person just is in your space and in your world. And
Mm.
so if there's not an option to escape, like yeah, just practicing
Generous assumptions.
generous assumptions.
Mm.
So again, I just like, coaching often it's less about stopping something and it's more about swapping it or having an intention to move towards. And I love
Yeah.
this as an intention to move towards practicing more, the power
Yeah.
of generous assumptions.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it got a little mention, and it would be quite easy to gloss right over that in this chapter. There
Mm.
was so much more, but I just love that, um, yeah, we could unpack that a bit more today.
Yeah. And I think over the next, the course of the next week or so, now that we've had this conversation and I read it and there's a couple of things underlined in the book, but I think having this conversation's highlighted it to me so that I can be more mindful of it in the next little
Yeah.
while and be curious how often, like, pay attention to my assumptions of people's faces, the things that people say, of their body language and all of that, and just be aware of it and to give it a go. Have a go this week. That's what I'm going to do, at being a
Yeah,
bit more
yeah, me
generous
too.
and see what it looks like, see what it does for me, see what it does for how I see the world and the connection that I have with myself and with others. And I think too, what's important, and I believe he talks about it, is being generous with our assumptions about ourselves.
Oh, yeah. It all starts there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So I think,
yeah.
when we look in the mirror, being a bit generous in that space too. When we're
And next time I go walking with hubby around the Brisbane River,
yeah,
just checking in and just being a bit more generous about assuming that, I could assume that we're both right.
could assume that you're both right.
Oh
I
gosh. Well,
love it.
thanks,
I love
Al.
those conversations. All right, bless you, mate. Can't wait to do it
See
again
you
next
next
time.
time.
See ya.